the world's largest bird of prey, inhabits the remote mountains of South America. The condor has given its name to a new weapon of mass terror, a missile being developed by Argentina in a secret hilltop bunker. But the condor will fly not only in South American skies, but over the deserts of the Middle East, where Egypt and Iraq are Argentina's collaborators in the project. Here, a chemical attack is Israel's nightmare. Her army trains for such an emergency. They fear that a Condor missile equipped with a poison warhead could be aimed at Israel's cities. This prospect has thrust the issue of missile proliferation to the top of the West's political agenda.
The acquisition of the ballistic missile capability is on the march, and therefore there is more attention being paid to this. It's probably one of the reasons that we're having this interview right now. There is much more of an interest in the acquisition of this ballistic missile capability by countries that didn't have it before. And then you take not just the ballistic missile capability, but add a chemical warhead to that. And the two, unfortunately, are beginning to merge. And by having a chemical capability on the top of a ballistic missile, you have real problems and a potential for real destabilization regionally as well as globally.
This is the story of a top-secret missile named the Condor, a weapon which could revolutionize warfare here in the Middle East, where two countries, Iraq and Egypt, are building this missile. The Condor was conceived and developed in Argentina, and it could pose a threat to the Falkland Islands and to Britain's interests too. The West has tried to stop what it fears will be a deadly marriage between chemical weapons and rocket technology. But the Condor is well down the road towards completion, thanks to European companies and European scientists prepared to risk the consequences of selling their expertise to build this missile. The Condor was conceived in Argentina in the early 1980s, the pet project of the commander of the Air Force. A site was chosen in the province of Cordoba. Argentina's observatory and satellite ground station are conveniently nearby. The military control the billion-pound program based at Faldo del Carmen in the Sierra Chica Mountains. Here, a series of reinforced bunkers have been built deep into the mountain. Inside are laboratories for assembling and testing missile parts. According to locals like Pascual Suez, who was a labourer on the site, the works director was a German. It was widely known locally that Faldo del Carmen was a missile factory.
The
building work started with moving earth, then laying the foundations. There were at least 8 or 10 buildings, and it took 3 years to build, finishing in 1986. It was the German who was the boss. He managed everything: materials for the site, transport. Computers were brought in on closed trucks and containers. Nobody knew a thing.
The nearby resort town of Alta Gracia saw an influx of foreigners, engineers and scientists brought in to provide the technical know-how and logistical support to build the missiles. Up to 150 people from Germany, France and Italy arrived. Many of them stayed in the Sierras Hotel, according to the works manager there.
We didn't have any contact with them. We just saw them around. They used to leave at 7 in the morning by coach to work at Faldo del Carmen. We knew they were scientists because they wore identity cards. The order to put them up in the hotel came from the presidential palace, from Buenos Aires.
In 1985, the Argentinians displayed an early version of the Condor 1A, at the Paris Air Show. They claimed it was for civilian uses, for meteorological research. Since then, this prototype's been developed into a missile, the Condor 2. Condor 2 is a ballistic missile fired from a ground-launch vehicle. It has a 2-stage rocket to be powered by solid fuel motors. The missile's guidance system is preset before launch, and at the back, fins and nozzles help control the flight direction. After launch, the first stage falls away. The second stage propels the rocket on. Kondor can carry a warhead of up to 500 kilos. It has a range of 1,000 kilometers and is accurate to within 750 meters.
If you take a missile that, say, has a range of 1,000 kilometers, it could very easily be adjusted through engineering devices to take the range from 1,000 kilometers to 1,500 kilometers or 2,000 kilometers or 2,500 kilometers. And then you have countries that possess these weapons really having potential to destabilize much beyond the region. It concerns me about the Kondor missile as well as other missiles that have this capability.
Theoretically, Kondor could carry a nuclear warhead, but's more likely to have a chemical or explosive warhead. A chemical warhead is simple to make. An outside casing containing, for example, a nerve agent and a bursting charge to disperse the contents. But Argentina is developing a high explosive, a state-of-the-art conventional warhead for Kondor. As the missile nears its target, fuel explodes, creating temperatures of 2,000 degrees, suffocating people on the ground. Submunitions, small bomblets spray out, devastating strategic installations. Such a warhead might be aimed at Port Stanley or the Falklands runway.
We have to consider that it might be used against the Falklands. It would be a very stupid weapon with which to pursue a claim to the Falklands. But it's, again, another example in a region which isn't inherently stable of something that may start up a dangerous arms race which may lead who knows where. It has two other aspects which are worrying. First, that it might get sold into other markets around the world because all these countries are short of real money, and potentially there's a danger of them selling it to anybody who can pay. And second, according to the Argentinian press, the partners, Egypt and Iraq, are Middle Eastern partners, and that is, of all regions, the region where it's easiest to imagine a scenario where the introduction of medium-range rocketry leads pretty swiftly to war.
The Middle Eastern connection was established in 1984. By then, Argentina was running short of money, and Egypt, in partnership with Iraq, offered financial support. Abu Ghazala, Egypt's defense minister, and a man committed to the expansion of his country's armaments industry, sent a delegation to Buenos Aires to negotiate a deal. Egypt, supported by Iraq, provides the bulk of the money. In return, both countries will eventually be able to produce their own Kondor missiles in the Middle East. Abu Ghazala himself oversees the Egyptian production of Kondor at Factory 17, a military site north of Cairo. Documents obtained by Panorama reveal for the first time the agreement between Argentina and Egypt on the BME, Ballistic Missile Egypt Program, another name for Kondor. This letter to Abu Ghazala from Raul Thomas of the Argentinian Defense Department refers to the cooperation between the two countries. A second letter confirms contracts have been signed. Intelligence sources fear that Iraq's participation in the Kondor project is linked with her interest in chemical warfare. These pictures were taken at Halabja, the Kurdish town captured last year by Iran in the Gulf War. Iraqi jets dropped nerve agents and mustard gas on the people. When the poison clouds cleared, hundreds of bloated bodies littered the streets. Kondor could drop hundreds of kilos of deadly nerve gas on civilians. Iraq has shown its willingness to use not only chemical weapons, but missiles too. Scud rockets were fired against Iran in the Gulf War. The Israeli military say Tel Aviv is vulnerable to Kondor missiles launched from both Cairo and Baghdad, missiles that could be equipped with chemical warheads.
In some sense, the growing focus of the world public opinion about this issue is dealing, with the problem of closing the barn door after the horses already ran away. But the use of these missiles during the Iraq-Iran war and the use in the same war of chemical warfare agents, even if not by missiles, makes the whole problem more severe and more serious for the future.
Until now, the Israeli Air Force has reigned supreme in the skies of the Middle East, but Kondor could change that. The missile flies 7 times faster than a jet fighter. As yet, there's no real defense against it, no Star Wars shield, except to build more missiles to retaliate with. Though Israel won't admit it, she has developed her own missile capability. This rocket race alarms the West. The chemical dimension is an added fear.
Our understanding of the Kondor system is that it's not an especially accurate missile, so that being fitted with a conventional warhead or with a nuclear warhead, we wouldn't hit the broadside of a barn, we say. It's just not a very keenly accurate system. It might much more be suited to carrying a chemical warhead as a terror weapon, and it has all the flavor of being that sort of system.
It's all too easy to imagine a scenario, for example, in the Middle East, where you might get the Israelis believing that they were threatened by weapons that could only be effectively surprise attack weapons. That is, they wouldn't have any purpose as defensive weapons, and that the Israelis on past form might take that as an invitation to make preemptive strikes. And I think there is a clear step downwards towards the abyss in spreading these kind of missiles.
The Kondor story begins in 1980 on the shores of a Swiss lake. This is Zug, a peaceful canton which owes its prosperity to discreet Swiss banking. From here, a group of companies affiliated to the German conglomerate Bohlen Industries provided technology for the Kondor project. Outside a large house above the lake, signboards proclaim the home of Consen SA, its sister company EFAT and subsidiary Desintec. Consen's staff are somewhat shy of publicity.
Excuse me, I wonder if you can give me any information about this company, Consen.
I can't give you any information, I'm sorry.
Consen's headquarters in Zug are at the heart of a network of companies set up to service the Kondor project. Companies in Argentina, Germany, Monaco, Austria, Jersey, even one in England. For 7 years now, intelligence agencies in Britain, America and Israel have been trying to piece together the jigsaw of the Consen connections to find out exactly how Western missile technology is being diverted to build the Kondor. Opposite Consen's office lives the man behind the company, Helmut Reiser, a German engineer. He was at home when we tried to ask him about Kondor. He didn't seem keen to speak to us either. Mr. Reiser has extensive contacts in Argentina. He set up the original Kondor deal. Intelligence sources call Reiser and his colleagues techno-mercenaries, men willing to sell their expertise for the highest price.
They're obeying the oldest commandment in the arms market, which is that if you don't sell, somebody else will. If there's money to be made, I might as well be the one to make it. That's the general attitude. And clearly that's what was happening here. In all their public statements, the individuals who are supposed to be involved have always said that what they do with the missile isn't our business.
In the letters confirming the cooperation between Egypt and Argentina on the Kondor missile deal, EFAT, Consen's sister company, is named as general contractor.
Around 1984, the Argentine program became fairly well known in missile circles, and the foreign engineers that were most heavily involved, apparently from West Germany, began to bring the two countries, Egypt and Argentina, together. In the one, they had a client who wanted to build a missile, and in the other, they had a nation without the technology, but who wanted to buy. And the Germans seem to have been the key brokers there, although both governments clearly were very interested themselves.
By the mid-1980s, the Washington administration and its Western allies realized they no longer controlled what had been an exclusive missile club. Alarmed about Third World missile proliferation and concerned at the part played by European companies in transferring technology, they decided to act. In 1985, the United States administration persuaded Western governments to lay down informal guidelines to stop the spread of missile technology to third world countries. And in April 1987, President Reagan announced that 7 industrialized nations, including the USA, Britain, Germany and Italy, had signed a formal missile technology control regime. The MTCR, as it's called, requires its signatories to impose export controls on the technology needed for missiles. It was intended to stop countries like Argentina from developing projects like the Kondor. The MTCR may have slowed such programs down, but it hasn't stopped them.
It is a good faith effort to move forward and say, how can we deal with this in a collective way? I can say this, that if we did not have the missile control regime, the situation would be far worse than it is today. The situation has gotten worse in a sense, but it would have gotten much worse if we did not have this regime that is seriously looking at the problem, offering remedies.
Until recently, Dr. Steve Bryan headed the Pentagon department which polices the transfer of missile technology. An impossible task, he says. Each country has different export restrictions, and existing laws can't prevent the transfer of knowledge or restrict the movement of individuals.
I'm not clear in my own mind the degree to which we in the West are really serious about controlling missile technology. I think we're serious about trying to convince the public that we're controlling missile technology, but if we want to be serious, we sure are doing it the wrong way in terms of implementing a regime that can work. The missile technology agreement is a promise without institutions. It's a promise without laws, and it's unenforceable.
The countries developing Kondor and the techno-mercenaries of the Consen group were determined to get round the new rules. Last summer, California was the scene of a daring attempt to smuggle missile components out under the noses of the US authorities. March the 19th, 1988, American Airlines Flight 123 arrives at Sacramento. Amongst the passengers was an Egyptian, Colonel Al-Gamal. He was met by Abdelkader Helmi, an Egyptian scientist living in California. Unknown to them, they were being followed by customs agents. Helmi drove his guest to a local motel, the La Quinta Inn. Customs had a tip-off that Abdelkader Helmi was smuggling missile parts to Egypt. He was a rocket scientist with Aerojet, a company involved in the US space program. Helmi was using his security clearance and access to classified information without the knowledge of his employers. Helmi lived in the hills above Sacramento. Agents who followed him there the afternoon Al-Gamal arrived saw Helmi storing several large cardboard boxes in his garage. These boxes accompanied the two men on a flight to Washington 2 days later, where it became clear this operation involved the Egyptian embassy. Al-Gamal and the boxes were driven by diplomatic car to a house in T Street used as a residence for embassy employees. Al-Gamal returned to Cairo. The boxes stayed in the embassy. A court order allowed customs to tap Helmi's phone. Panorama has obtained the transcripts of Helmi's conversations with his control, Colonel Yusuf, an Egyptian diplomat in Austria. Helmi complained the shipping clerk at the Egyptian embassy was asking awkward questions.
I told him these items are controlled. They can't be exported outside the USA. I told him if they knew I'm buying it to export, I'll be thrown in jail. I said to him, we're acquiring the material for a special purpose, and no one knows about it except the minister.
The minister is believed by intelligence sources to be a reference to Abu Ghazala, Egypt's defense minister. Phone taps, surveillance and a painstaking examination of Helmi's dustbins revealed an extensive shopping list of chemical and technical components. In the words of one expert, a complete package to build or upgrade a tactical missile system. The companies that Helmi approached were unaware that the materials were destined for export for a third world missile program. The content of the boxes was revealed as carbon-carbon, a material that wraps around the missile's nose to protect it from the intense heat of re-entry. 2 missile nose cones were on the list, a microwave telemetry antenna suitable for a tactical missile system, and rocket fuel ingredients, antioxidant 2246 and powdered aluminium. MAPO, a rocket propellant component, and versamide 125, a rocket glue.
As soon as we realized the technology, we knew we were doing something very large. And when we introduced or were able to identify the fact that you had diplomatic type ties to it, we knew that it was a very sensitive investigation.
Customs had to act when phone taps revealed the boxes had been taken to Baltimore Airport. They were seized as they were being loaded onto an Egyptian Air Force flight to Cairo. Helmi will stand trial in August for conspiracy to violate export control laws. Abu Ghazala's part was played down. Egypt's a major US ally. The affair was embarrassing for both countries.
Carbon-carbon is used at the 2 hot ends of the missile, the re-entry vehicle and the engines, the guidance systems down by the engines, the steering vanes and such. Those are 2 key areas, and there are no easy substitutes. There are no other obvious technologies to turn to, and these are not things that third world countries can manufacture themselves. They've got to get it from somewhere. And what the case showed was that these countries will turn anywhere, even to stealing from very close allies, in order to get the technology they need.
Helmi's dustbins revealed that the Consen EFAT group was financing the smuggling operation. EFAT wired checks for over $1 million to Helmi's account via a German bank. 2 months later, the techno-mercenaries received a warning. Their activities hadn't gone unnoticed. "3 a.m. on May the 8th, 1988. The square in Sperased, a village in the south of France. A Peugeot car belonging to Eckhard Schrotz, a wealthy German living here. A powerful bomb destroyed the Peugeot.
La voiture a littéralement explosé.
The car literally exploded, and my car next to it caught fire. The police carried out an investigation, but we weren't told anything. Mr. Schrotz is a German businessman who's lived here quite a few years. He has a company called Consen, with a head office in Monaco. He was the real target of the attack.
This is the home of Eckhard Schrotz. There are no pictures of this shadowy German engineer who took over from Helmut Reiser as Consen's general manager. Intelligence services say Schrotz is the Mr. Fix-It of the Kondor project. An obscure group, the Guardians of Islam, said they planted the bomb because Schrotz sold rockets to Iraq, the enemy of Iran. But some believe Mossad, the Israeli Secret Service, was responsible. Whoever it was, the message was clear: stop the Kondor project. The bombers knew that Schrotz was channeling technology through a second Consen office in Monaco, the tiny but wealthy principality where no one inquires too closely into a company's dealings. Schrotz entertained engineers and military officers from Argentina and from Egypt at the Beach Plaza Hotel. Kondor clients prepared to pay many times the going rate for missile technology. Today, Mr. Schrotz spends his time behind the walls of his villa in Sperased, protected by cameras and electronic gates, and by local gendarmes who've advised him not to talk to journalists. Visitors are threatened with arrest. Mr. Schrotz is a frightened man. So too is his caretaker, the man who normally drove the Peugeot.
Listen, when you see your car burning in the middle of the night, it has an effect on you. I can't say anything because I don't want it to happen again. I've got nothing to do with it. I'm not involved in all this. I'm just the man's chauffeur. It's dangerous to stir all this up again. People's private lives are at stake.
Since the car bomb, the Consen Group worldwide has tried to keep a low profile. But we've traced 9 companies, 4 in Argentina, 5 in Europe, involved in the Kondor project. Consen and IFAT, the main companies, are still based in Zug. But a third company in Salzburg, Austria, is now active in the missile's development. This company is called Delta Consult.
Good afternoon. We're from the BBC.
We visited Delta Consult in Salzburg. We understand that this company is involved with the Kondor project with missile technology.
This is definitely not.
Not true?
Not true.
Do you have any connection to the Consen Group?
No, definitely not.
To IFAT?
No, definitely not.
But Austrian business registers confirm the major shareholder in Delta Consult is IFAT. Neither Austria nor Switzerland are signatories to the missile agreement, but Germany is, and the Consen Group has a majority holding in a German company, PBG, located in Freising, a town north of Munich. Intelligence services believe these Consen companies have acted as a conduit for technology and expertise from some of Europe's biggest defence contractors, who've supplied the launch truck for Kondor 2, elements of the guidance system, the engines and the specialist fuels needed for them, and equipment for assessing the missile's performance. Panorama has obtained Consen internal documents dated after the missile control regime was implemented. These name a number of companies, describing them as most important in cooperation and as subcontractors. First on the list is the giant German industrial group Messerschmitt Bölkow Blohm, MBB.
MBB, Messerschmitt Bölkow Blohm. Past achievements include the Me-108, an exemplary passenger plane built by Messerschmitt, the Me-109 fighter aircraft.
MBB is Germany's largest aerospace group, a partner in the European Airbus, and one of NATO's chief contractors. The company, based in Munich, specializes in making missiles. When we first approached them, MBB told us they had worked on Kondor 1, a civilian project, but said they withdrew in 1985, concerned about its military applications. The German government backed their claim.
The deutsche Firma MBB. The German firm MBB withdrew from the Kondor project back in 1985, after information had been obtained to the effect that the project had acquired a military dimension. The firm did what was correct under the circumstances. More recent checks by the German authorities do not indicate that this situation has changed, so it would be fair to say that nothing illegal has taken place.
But despite German assurances, the Israeli government, for one, believe MBB has not severed all its links with Kondor.
We do know that Messerschmitt Bölkow Blohm, the MBB West German firm, is the overall responsible for the overall planning of the project and for various systems in it.
Do you have evidence that MBB has been involved in the Kondor project?
I have no evidence here in this room, but it is well known. I'm sure that every intelligence service in the Western world might find the evidence very easily.
MBB dispute this accusation of continuing involvement in the Kondor project. But Panorama understands the part they've played is more significant than they're prepared to admit. One of the company's divisions, MBB Transtechnica, specializes in missile programs and technology transfer. It provides rocket testing laboratories and specialist engineers. To begin with, Transtechnica worked openly on Kondor. But even after MBB say they began to pull out of the project, sources in the company say this division continued work in Argentina without the MBB chairman's knowledge. Transtechnica delivered a laboratory for measuring the missile's ballistic curve and worked on Kondor's warhead. This is the high-security Munich home of the elusive Adolf Hammer, former MBB head of military research, responsible for Transtechnica's Kondor work. The man MBB sources say continued to work on Kondor in Argentina. Hammer's now a director of IFAT, and works from Delta Consult's Salzburg office. MBB have banned him from their premises, but intelligence sources say he maintains links with his old colleagues inside MBB, who are still working on Middle Eastern missile projects. MBB management have refused to be interviewed. They've given us a short statement, admitting now that the company carried out a feasibility study for Kondor 2, a military project, as late as 1987. They say they withdrew when they became suspicious about how Argentina intended to use the Kondor 2. However, MBB have admitted to us that they are still supplying parts for a missile research laboratory in Iraq, a laboratory due to go into operation this summer. They say that obtaining the necessary export licenses was not MBB's responsibility, and that no German regulations were broken. The Iraq missile laboratory MBB is involved in is near the town of Mosul. This top-secret site is called SAD-16. These pictures were taken secretly at SAD-16. Iraq claims the project's a civilian one, but Western agencies say it's a research laboratory for Kondor and other missiles. This plan of SAD-16 shows launch pads, wind tunnels, a hangar for prototypes and chemical laboratories. The building work, begun in 1983, was supervised by a German company, Gildemeister Projector. Banoraama has obtained a copy of the contract for SAD-16. In it, the Iraqi government confirms Gildemeister and its partner, MBB, will provide technical assistance in research and development. Attached is a detailed list of laboratory equipment, which experts say could be applied to missile research and production. Gildemeister say they obtained government clearance for what they believe to be a civilian project. Yet MBB and Gildemeister are supplying apparatus including equipment for studying aerodynamics, fuel production, the flight path of missiles, antennas and microwaves. Back in Germany, MBB kept the SAD-16 contract secret, even from some members of the board like Klaus Merens, the representative of IG Metall, the metalworkers' trades union. He heard rumours MBB had supplied rocket laboratories to Iraq and to Egypt.
We asked for information about these exports of MBB, and we got information from the management, of course confidential information, and we heard that MBB was involved in transferring technology which at least could be used and was intended to be used for military purposes, especially in a number of countries in the Middle East.
And what did MBB say was the reason that they were still involved in this trade after Germany had signed a missile technology control regime?
Well, concerning these countries in the Middle East, they said that this again went back into the past and was not under responsibility of the present management, and they themselves felt concerned about that. They would like to move out of this business, but were not able because of obligations they had according to the treaties they signed.
So the contracts are still ongoing?
It seems they are. I think we're going to have more information in the very near future, but it seems that the contracts are still valid and still going, yeah.
Why don't they cancel those contracts?
Well, again, we were told that this would cost the company a large amount of money, and for this reason it's not possible to withdraw from these contracts immediately.
The German Export Bureau polices the transfer of military technology, including that covered by the missile agreement. December's revelations that German companies were involved in a Libyan chemical weapons plant at Rabta caused this office and the government acute embarrassment. A note on a computer reminds them of that. The government says checks are tighter now, penalties tougher. With missile components, staff check export applications against equipment controlled under the MTCR agreement. But a missile consists of hundreds of parts, many with civilian as well as military uses. This office depends on companies telling them what the parts going to places like SAD-16 are intended for. Do you think the government knows of MBB's involvement? If so, why hasn't it acted sooner?
It has become clear that the instruments of control that the government uses are not very effective. And, well, my information is that all these contracts were licensed by the government. I don't know if the information the government received from MBB were well, detailed enough to make the right judgment, but I don't think that anything they transferred to those countries was really illegal. They feel very uncomfortable in the situation they have come in, and this is because they realize that even if the contract and the deal was legal, it's politically and morally a very doubtful business, and so I think it's correct to say that they violated the spirit of the German restrictions on arms exports, even if they got legal licenses.
How far is it a question of political will in terms of stopping this kind of transfer?
I think it's entirely a question of political will. I don't think we need a missile technology agreement to prevent these kinds of transactions. We need the governments to tell their major defense contractors not to do this sort of thing. If they did that, that would be the end of it. There's not a doubt in my mind that if the German government told MBB or any other German company that it didn't want them selling missile guidance systems or missile technology to Argentina or to Egypt or any place else, that they wouldn't sell it.
On Inauguration Day, the Bush administration declared the control of missile technology one of their top priorities. In this, they're backed by Britain. Now the American Senate is pressing for sanctions against European companies which violate the missile agreement. Twice the US authorities have asked the German government for details of MBB's involvement in Kondor, including the warhead. They're not yet satisfied with the answers. German companies have been named, the Messerschmitt company, for example. Are you, the US, prepared to pressure the German government to do something about that?
We are very sensitive and very informed on this particular issue. And when it matters that concern to this proliferation of ballistic missile technology can be documented and established, there's no doubt about it that there will be communications. I can certainly appreciate any country that wants to advance to exports, but to advance exports that, in fact, that are going to come back and to be detrimental to that country is really counterproductive to their national security interests. Not only the national security interests of that particular country, but the national security interests of the entire West.
Well, it must be for the German government to take action. I think the German government and a number of other governments are taking all this now very seriously, so I have some reasonable hopes of that. We discuss with our partners in the MTCR regime such information as we have, but it must be for the individual governments concerned to deal with their own companies.
Do you think that the German government has failed to take a tough enough line so far?
Well, I think there were questions certainly put by the Americans before the Raptor affair, but I have to say that I think the German government is now taking these matters very much more seriously.
The net is closing on the German Kondor connection. Last Friday, 35 customs agents on the orders of the Munich Prosecutor's Department raided 2 MBB offices in Munich and Schrobenhausen and 7 other locations. They're now investigating the Kondor and other missile projects. Investigators raided PBG too, looking for evidence to confirm their suspicions that this Konsen subsidiary handled some of the Kondor technology. And last month, Gildemeister was raided. Inquiries into its role in the Saad-16 Iraqi project continue. It's a critical time for MBB, which has been losing money. A lifeline's been offered in the form of a proposed merger with Daimler-Benz. The investigation is bound to affect that. The government now acknowledge that MBB may have been involved in Kondor later than 85. But till the investigation's complete, officials stand by what they told us before the raid.
According to our information, MBB does comply with the regulations. If it didn't, enormous damage would be done to the firm's reputation, and I wouldn't know anyone in the firm who would take such a risk. I can declare my trust in MBB, and I'd be pleased if other Western governments were in a position to say the same thing about their own firms under similar circumstances.
3, 2, 1, fire!
The superpowers are destroying their missiles. But the Third World is intent on acquiring these tickets to political and military status. The Kondor, with its chemical warfare potential, is the beginning of a new generation of terror weapons. Thanks to European engineers, the Kondor 2 prototype will fly in the next year. Then it will be for sale, and the West cannot control who will buy it.
A weapons technology that used to be the monopoly of a few great powers has become something for any country with the money and the inclination. Now there are about 20, 25 third world countries trying to get exactly the same capabilities. And when they have that capability, the international balance of power will shift, and it'll shift forever.